The desert wind cut across my face like a knife, and my son stood 3 feet away holding a pen like it was a loaded gun. "Sign the will, Mom, or you're sleeping here tonight." His voice was steady. Too steady. Like he'd practiced this moment in his head 100 times before dragging me out here to the middle of nowhere. I looked around, nothing but sand and silence for miles. No houses. No cars. Not even a bird in the sky. Just me, Calvin, and the setting sun that seemed to be running away from what was about to happen. My hands were shaking. Not from the cold, but from the realization that the boy I'd raised, the one who used to cry when he stepped on ants, was now threatening to abandon his 78-year-old mother in the desert if she didn't sign away everything she owned. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. I stared at the folder in his hands. Inside were papers. My will. The one I'd spent months working on with my lawyer, making sure everything was fair, everything was right. And now Calvin wanted me to change it. All of it. Sign everything over to him. The house, the land, the investments my late husband Walter and I had spent 40 years building together. "Calvin," I whispered, my throat dry as the sand beneath my feet. "How could you do this to me?" He didn't even blink. Just glanced at his watch like I was wasting his time. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. You've had your life, Mom. Let me have mine." That's when I knew. This wasn't a bad decision made in anger. This was planned. Calculated. He'd driven me out here on purpose, knowing I had no phone signal, no way to call for help, no way to escape. He'd smiled the whole drive here, talking about some property he wanted to show me, and I'd trusted him. Like a fool, I'd trusted my own son. My heart felt like it was breaking into 1,000 pieces, each one cutting deeper than the last. I thought about Walter, my husband who'd worked 2 jobs so Calvin could have piano lessons and summer camp. I thought about the nights I stayed up when Calvin was sick, holding his hand, praying he'd be okay. I thought about every sacrifice, every hug, every "I love you, Mom," that now felt like a lie. The pen was cold in my hand when he pushed it toward me. "Just sign it, and we can go home." Simple as that. But it wasn't simple. Nothing about this was simple. Because standing there in that desert, I realized something that made my blood run cold. Calvin had already decided I wasn't coming back the same woman who'd climbed into his truck that morning. He was either going to take my money, or he was going to take my dignity. Maybe both. I looked down at the papers. My signature line was highlighted in yellow, like he'd prepared this days ago. Weeks, maybe. How long had he been planning this? How many times had he looked at me over dinner and thought about this moment? "You really think you can do this?" I asked him, my voice barely above a whisper. "You think you can threaten your own mother and just walk away like nothing happened?" He stepped closer, and I saw something in his eyes that made my stomach turn. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even greed. It was impatience. Like I was a problem he needed to solve before dinner. "Mom, I'm not going to ask again. Sign the papers." The sun was sinking lower now, painting everything orange and red. In a few hours, it would be pitch black out here. No lights. No warmth. Just cold desert night and whatever animals came out when humans weren't supposed to be around. I gripped the pen tighter, and for a moment, I thought about refusing. I thought about calling his bluff, telling him to go ahead and leave me here. But then I looked at his face, really looked at it, and I knew he would do it. This man who used to be my little boy would absolutely drive away and leave me stranded in the desert. So I did the only thing I could do. I signed. But not the way he expected. You see, Calvin thought he was the smart one. He thought he'd backed me into a corner with no way out. He thought that pen stroke would make him rich and me powerless. He smiled as I wrote my name, That same proud, victorious smile I'd seen when he won his first Little League trophy. Like he'd accomplished something worth celebrating. "Good choice, Mom," he said, taking the folder back and tucking it under his arm like it was a business deal he'd just closed. "See? That wasn't so hard." He helped me back into the truck, actually had the nerve to act like a gentleman, and we drove home in complete silence. He didn't say a word, and neither did I. I just watched his hands on the steering wheel, steady and unbothered, like he'd just taken me out for ice cream instead of threatening to leave me in the desert. But here's what Calvin didn't know. Here's what his greed and his arrogance and his cruel little plan didn't account for. 2 weeks before that drive, I'd made a phone call. And that phone call was about to turn his entire world upside down. If you're new here, welcome to the channel. Don't forget to subscribe. You don't want to miss what happens when justice comes quietly. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever been betrayed by someone you loved? How did you handle it? Because what I'm about to tell you next is going to make you believe in karma again. The whole thing started 3 months before that desert drive. Before the threats. Before I ever saw that cold look in my son's eyes. It started with a phone call on a Wednesday morning. I was in my kitchen making coffee when my phone rang. Calvin's name lit up the screen, and my heart did that little jump it always does when your child calls. Doesn't matter if they're 8 or 48, you still get that flutter of hope that maybe they just called to say hi, to tell you they love you, to ask how you're doing. I should have known better. "Hey Mom," he said, and his voice had that tone. The one that meant he needed something. "You got a minute to talk?" I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table Walter and I bought at a yard sale 30 years ago. "Of course, sweetheart. What's going on?" There was a pause. A long one. The kind that's filled with practiced words and rehearsed emotions. "Mom, I'm in trouble. The business, it's underwater. We took on a project that went south, and now we're looking at some serious debt." My stomach dropped. Calvin ran a construction company with his friend Derek. They'd been doing well for years. Or at least that's what he'd always told me. New trucks. Nice clothes. He'd even taken a vacation to Mexico 6 months ago. "How much trouble are we talking about?" I asked. Another pause. "About $60,000 worth of trouble." I nearly dropped my coffee mug. $60,000. That was more than Walter and I had made in 2 years when we were first married. That was more than our first house cost. "Calvin, that's a lot of money. What happened?" He sighed, and I could picture him running his hand through his hair the way he used to when he was a teenager trying to explain why he'd wrecked the car. "It's complicated, Mom. The client backed out halfway through, and we'd already bought all the materials. Now we're stuck with the bill and no way to pay it. My mother's heart wanted to fix it. That's what we do, isn't it? Our kids hurt, and we want to make it stop. Even when they're grown. Even when they should know better. What do you need?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "I hate to ask this, Mom. I really do. But could you loan me the money? Just until we get back on our feet. I'll pay you back with interest, I swear." I thought about my savings account. The one Walter and I had built penny by penny, sacrifice by sacrifice. The one that was supposed to be my safety net now that I was alone. "Calvin, that's almost everything I have saved up." "I know, Mom. I know. And I wouldn't ask if it wasn't an emergency. But if I don't pay this debt, we could lose everything. The business, the equipment, everything Dad would have wanted me to build." There it was. The dad card. He knew exactly what he was doing, mentioning Walter like that. Knew it would hit me right in the heart where I was still healing. I should have said no. I should have told him to go to a bank, to figure it out himself, to be the adult he was supposed to be. But I was still his mother. Still the woman who'd kissed his scraped knees and told him everything would be okay. "All right," I said. "I'll transfer the money tomorrow." The relief in his voice sounded genuine. "Thank you, Mom. Thank you so much. I promise I'll pay you back as soon as things turn around." But things never turned around. 3 months passed, and I didn't see a single dollar returned. What I did see was Calvin showing up at my house more often. And that's when things started to feel wrong. At first, it seemed like he was trying to be a better son. He'd stop by with groceries, saying he was in the neighborhood and thought I might need a few things. He'd offer to fix things around the house, the leaky faucet I'd mentioned, the loose board on the porch. He even took me out to dinner twice, something he hadn't done since Walter's funeral. I wanted to believe he was changing. That maybe almost losing his business had reminded him what was important. That maybe he'd realized family mattered more than money. But then I started noticing things. Little things that didn't quite add up. Like how he'd ask about my medications, which ones I took, how often, whether they made me forgetful. Or how he'd wander into my study while I was making tea, saying he was just looking around, but really scanning the shelves where I kept my important documents. One evening, he installed a new security system for me. Said it was a gift, that he worried about me living alone. But after he left, I noticed he'd kept one of the access codes for himself. For emergencies, he'd said. I started keeping my bedroom door locked at night. The worst part was how he'd bring up my will. Casually. Like it was just conversation. "Mom, have you thought about updating your will lately? You know, with Dad gone, things are different now." Or, "Mom, you're not getting any younger. You should make sure everything's in order. Just in case." Just in case. Like he was waiting for me to drop dead so he could cash in. I'd laugh it off, change the subject, but the knot in my stomach got tighter every time. Because a son shouldn't talk to his mother like she's a countdown clock. A son shouldn't look at his mother and see dollar signs instead of the woman who gave him life. Then came the night I woke up to footsteps in my house. It was 2 in the morning. I heard the floorboards creaking in my study, the one room in the house that still creaked no matter how careful you were. My heart started pounding so hard I thought it might break through my chest. I grabbed the phone on my nightstand, ready to call 911, when I heard his voice. "Mom? You awake?" "Calvin." It was Calvin in my house in the middle of the night. I got out of bed, my hands shaking, and found him standing in my study with a flashlight, looking through my filing cabinet. "Calvin, what are you doing here?" He didn't even look guilty. Just turned around with that same easy smile and said, "Hey, Mom. Sorry, didn't mean to wake you. I was looking for your insurance papers. You mentioned something about updating your policy, and I wanted to help you get organized." I never mentioned updating my insurance policy. "It's 2 in the morning, I said, my voice harder than I'd ever used with him before. "Yeah, I know. I couldn't sleep, and I have a key, so I figured I'd come help out. No big deal." But it was a big deal. It was a huge deal. Because standing there in my study, watching my son rifle through my personal documents in the middle of the night, I realized something that made my blood run cold. Calvin wasn't trying to help me. He was preparing. Cataloging. Planning something I couldn't quite see yet, but could feel creeping closer like a storm on the horizon. "I think you should go home," I said quietly. He looked at me, really looked at me, and for just a second, I saw something flash across his face. Annoyance. Frustration. Like I was getting in the way of something important. "Sure, Mom. Whatever you want." He left, and I stood there in the dark, listening to his truck pull away. Then I walked to my desk, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out my lawyer's business card. Her name was Miriam Coyle. Sharp as a tack and twice as tough. She'd handled Walter's will, and she'd handle mine too. But this time, I was going to need her to do something different. Something Calvin would never expect. Because if my son was planning to take what wasn't his, I was going to make damn sure he got exactly what he deserved. Nothing. I called Miriam first thing Monday morning. "Mrs. Keaton," she answered, her voice warm but professional. "What can I do for you?" I didn't waste time with small talk. "Miriam, I need to change my will. And I need it done quietly." There was a pause on the other end. Then, "Come to my office this afternoon. 2 o'clock. Don't tell anyone you're coming." That's what I loved about Miriam. She didn't ask stupid questions. She just understood. I spent the rest of the morning trying to act normal, but my mind was racing. Every time I looked at a family photo on the wall, Calvin at his high school graduation, Calvin and Walter fishing at the lake, Calvin holding his first paycheck with that proud smile, I felt something break inside me. How does a mother make the decision to cut her son out of her life? How do you look at the child you raised and decide that love isn't enough anymore? But it wasn't really about love, was it? It was about respect. And Calvin had stopped respecting me the moment he saw me as an obstacle instead of his mother. At exactly 2 o'clock, I walked into Miriam's law office downtown. It was a small place, tucked between a bakery and a tax preparation service, but Miriam had handled more family drama in this building than most lawyers see in a lifetime. She was waiting for me with a pot of coffee and a notepad already filled with notes. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "Tell me what's going on." I told her everything. The $60,000. The late-night visit. The questions about my will. The way Calvin looked at me now, like I was a problem to be solved instead of a person to be loved. Miriam listened without interrupting, her face calm but her eyes sharp. When I finished, she set down her pen and leaned back in her chair. "So your son is trying to manipulate you into giving him your estate before you're ready." "That's what it feels like," I said. "But I don't have proof. Just a feeling." Feelings are evidence, Marjorie. Especially when they come from 40 years of knowing someone. She pulled out a fresh document and slid it across the desk. "Here's what I'm thinking. We create a contingency will, one that activates only if you change your original will under duress or coercion." I stared at the paper. A contingency will? Exactly. If someone forces you to sign away your estate, through threats, manipulation, or any form of pressure, this secondary will automatically takes precedence. Everything you own goes to a different beneficiary of your choosing. My heart started beating faster. And that would hold up in court? Absolutely. Especially if we document your intentions right now, while you're of sound mind and clearly not under any pressure. She picked up a small recording device from her desk. "I'm going to record your statement. You'll explain why you're creating this contingency, who you want to benefit from it, and why you believe there's a risk of coercion. That recording becomes legal evidence." I thought about Calvin. About that cold look in his eyes when he'd been going through my filing cabinet. About the way he'd said, "You're not getting any younger, Mom," like he was counting down the days until I died. "Okay," I said. "Let's do it." Miriam hit record, and I spoke into that little device like I was confessing to a priest. I explained everything, the money I'd loaned Calvin, the strange visits, the midnight break-in, the constant questions about my will. I explained that I loved my son but I didn't trust him anymore. And I explained that if he ever tried to force me to change my will, I wanted to make sure he got nothing. "And who would you like to designate as your contingency beneficiary?" Miriam asked. I didn't even hesitate. "Tessa Calder, Calvin's ex-wife." Miriam's eyebrows went up just slightly, but she didn't question it. Just wrote down the name and looked at me expectantly. "Tessa was good to me," I said, my voice softer now. "When Walter died, she was the one who showed up. Not Calvin. Tessa. She brought me casseroles and sat with me when I couldn't stop crying. She helped me sort through Walter's things when Calvin said he was too busy with work. I remembered the day Calvin had told me he was leaving Tessa. Said she wasn't ambitious enough for him. Said he needed someone who matched his drive, his energy. 3 months later, he was dating some woman from his gym who drove a BMW and talked about investment portfolios at dinner. Tessa had been heartbroken. Not because of the divorce that had been coming for a while, but because she genuinely loved being part of our family. She'd loved Walter like he was her own father. She'd loved me like I was more than just her mother-in-law. When I had my knee surgery last year, Tessa drove me to every physical therapy appointment. Every single one. Calvin called twice. Miriam nodded slowly. So Tessa gets everything if Calvin forces your hand. Everything, I confirmed. The house, the land, the investments. All of it. We spent the next 2 hours going through every detail, making sure the will was airtight. Miriam explained that if I ever signed a new will under duress, whether Calvin threatened me, manipulated me, or even just pressured me when I was vulnerable, this contingency will would immediately take effect. He won't know about this, Miriam said. Not until it's too late. So if he tries anything, he'll think he's won. He'll think you signed everything over to him like he wanted. But really, he'll have signed it all away to Tessa. Exactly. A small smile tugged at my lips. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind of smile you give when you realize that sometimes the only way to fight back against cruelty is with quiet, calculated justice. We signed everything, notarized it, and Miriam locked the documents in her safe. Then she walked me to the door and put a hand on my shoulder. Marjorie, I hope you never have to use this. I hope your son comes to his senses and realizes what he's throwing away. Me too, I said. But we both knew better. I drove home that afternoon feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Not happy. You can't be happy when you're preparing for your own child to betray you, but relieved. Because now I had a plan. Now I had control. 2 weeks later, Calvin knocked on my door with that fake smile and said, "Hey Mom, want to go for a drive?" And I said yes. Because I knew exactly what he was planning. And I also knew he had no idea what was coming. The morning of the drive, I woke up with a pit in my stomach that wouldn't go away. It was Tuesday. The wind was already picking up outside, rattling the windows like it was trying to warn me about something. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, just staring at the photo on my nightstand. Walter and me on our wedding day, both of us so young and stupid and in love. "I wish you were here," I whispered to the photo. "You'd know what to say to him. You always did." But Walter wasn't here. And Calvin wasn't the boy who used to listen to his father anymore. I got dressed slowly. Jeans, a sweater, comfortable shoes. I don't know why I chose those shoes. Maybe some part of me already knew I might need to walk, or run, or survive something I couldn't quite imagine yet. Calvin showed up at 11, right on time. He was wearing sunglasses even though the sky was cloudy, and his smile was too big, too bright. Like he was taking me to Disneyland instead of God knows where. "Ready for an adventure, Mom?" he asked, leaning against his truck like he was posing for a cologne ad. Adventure. That's what he called it. "Where are we going again?" I asked, even though he'd already told me yesterday. I wanted to hear him say it again. Wanted to see if he'd lie differently this time. "Just some property I'm thinking about bidding on. Out past Carson Valley. Beautiful land. I want your opinion before I commit to anything." My opinion. Like I mattered. Like this was really about asking for advice instead of something much darker. I grabbed my purse and my phone, made sure it was fully charged, and climbed into the passenger seat. The truck smelled like pine air freshener and something else. Cologne, maybe, or guilt. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. We drove out of town, past the grocery store where I'd shopped for 30 years, past the church where Walter and I got married, past the elementary school where Calvin learned to read. Every familiar landmark felt like a goodbye. Calvin was chatty at first, talking about the weather, about how business was picking up, about some restaurant he wanted to take me to next week. All surface-level garbage that meant nothing. I played along, nodded, said, "That's nice," in all the right places. But I was watching him out of the corner of my eye, studying the way his hands gripped the steering wheel a little too tight, the way his jaw clenched whenever I asked a question. We hit the highway, and that's when the conversation died. He stopped talking, just drove. The radio wasn't even on. Just silence and the sound of tires on asphalt and my heart beating too fast in my chest. I checked my phone. 4 bars. Still had service. 20 minutes later, 3 bars. 40 minutes, 2 bars. An hour in, and there was nothing. No signal. No little icon telling me I could call for help if I needed it. Just the words, "no service," mocking me from the top of the screen. I glanced at Calvin. He was still staring straight ahead, but there was something different about his face now. The fake smile was gone. His jaw was set. His eyes were cold. "How much further?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Not much." But we kept driving. The asphalt turned to gravel. The gravel turned to dirt. The trees disappeared, replaced by scrub brush and dust and nothing. "Calvin, where are we going?" "I told you. Property viewing. There's nothing out here." "That's the point, Mom. Undeveloped land. Investment opportunity." But I knew better. I'd lived long enough to recognize a lie when it was sitting 2 feet away from me, driving me further into nowhere. The truck finally stopped in the middle of what could only be described as the edge of the world. Sand stretched out in every direction. No houses. No roads. No people. Just emptiness and silence and the sinking sun casting long shadows across the desert floor. Calvin turned off the engine. The sudden quiet was deafening. "Come on out," he said, opening his door. "Let me show you around." My legs felt like lead as I climbed out of the truck. The wind hit me immediately, cold and sharp and relentless. I wrapped my sweater tighter around myself and looked at my son. He was walking toward the back of the truck, and when he turned around, he was holding a folder. Not a map. Not property documents. A folder I recognized immediately. My will. That's when I knew. This wasn't about property. This wasn't about investment opportunities. This was about money, power, and a son who decided his mother was worth more dead than alive. "Calvin," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing?" He walked toward me, the folder tucked under his arm like it was a business deal he was about to close. "We need to talk, Mom. About your future. And mine." The sun was sinking lower now, painting everything orange and red. In an hour, maybe 2, it would be dark. And if Calvin drove away without me, I'd be alone in the desert with no phone, no water, no way to survive the night. "I brought your will," he said calmly, opening the folder and pulling out the papers I'd worked so hard to get right. "I think it's time we made some changes." My heart was pounding so hard I thought he might hear it. "What kind of changes?" He stepped closer, and I could see it now, the coldness in his eyes that had been building for months. "You're going to sign everything over to me. The house, the land, the investments. All of it." I stared at him. "Calvin, your father and I worked our whole lives. And now I'm working." He cut me off. "I'm the one building something. I'm the one with plans. You're just sitting in that house, wasting away, holding on to money you don't even use." "That money is my security," I said, my voice shaking. That money is supposed to last me through. Through what? You're 78, Mom. How long do you really think you have left? The words hit me like a slap. Not because they weren't true. I was 78, and death was closer now than it used to be, but because of how easily he said it. How little it seemed to bother him that he was talking to his mother about her death like it was a business expense. I'm not signing over my will, I said, forcing strength into my voice that I didn't really feel. Calvin sighed, like I was a stubborn child who didn't understand basic math. Then he looked around at the empty desert, at the setting sun, at the miles of nothing stretching out in every direction. Mom, he said quietly, you're either signing this will or you're sleeping here tonight. Alone. The threat hung in the air between us like smoke. And the worst part? He said it so calmly, so matter-of-factly, like he was giving me two reasonable options instead of threatening to abandon his elderly mother in the middle of the desert. I looked at his face, really looked at it, searching for any trace of the boy who used to hold my hand in parking lots, who used to hug me goodnight, who used to tell me I was the best mom in the world. But that boy was gone. Or maybe he'd never really existed in the first place. My hands were shaking as I stared at the pen he was now holding out to me. Behind him, the sun was disappearing behind the horizon, taking the last of the warmth with it. And I realized that Calvin wasn't bluffing. He would leave me here. He would actually drive away and let me die in the desert if it meant getting what he wanted. So I reached out and took the pen from his hand. The pen felt heavier than it should have, like it was made of lead instead of plastic. Calvin spread the papers out on the hood of the truck, smoothing them down with his palm like he was setting up a business meeting. Except this wasn't a boardroom. This was the middle of nowhere, and the only thing being negotiated was how much of my dignity I'd have left when this was over. Just sign where it's highlighted, he said, pointing to the yellow marks he'd already made on the document. He'd planned this, prepared it, probably spent hours going through my will, figuring out exactly what he wanted to take and how to make it look legal. I looked down at the papers. Every line, every clause, every word represented something Walter and I had built together. The house where we'd raised Calvin. The land Walter's father had left us. The investments we'd scraped together over 40 years of hard work and sacrifice. And Calvin wanted it all. You know, I said quietly, not looking up from the papers, your father used to say that respect was the only inheritance that really mattered. Calvin shifted his weight, impatient. Yeah, well, Dad's not here anymore. No, he's not. I looked up at him then, and I let him see the heartbreak in my eyes. Let him see what his greed was doing to me. But if he was, this moment would kill him all over again. For just a second, one tiny, flickering second, something passed across Calvin's face. Guilt, maybe. Or regret. But it was gone as fast as it came, replaced by that cold determination that had brought us here in the first place. Mom, we don't have time for a guilt trip. The sun's going down. Sign the papers, and we can go home. Home. Like this was just a simple errand we were running. Like he wasn't holding my entire life hostage in the middle of the desert. I thought about Walter then. Really thought about him. About the man who'd worked himself to exhaustion so our family could have a better life. About the way he'd kiss my forehead every morning before work and tell me he loved me. About the last thing he'd said to me before he died, Marge, you'll know what to do when the time comes. And I did know. Because 2 weeks ago, I'd sat in Miriam's office and created a backup plan. A contingency will that would activate the moment I signed under duress. Calvin had no idea that this pen stroke wasn't giving him everything. It was taking everything away. I put the pen to paper, and Calvin leaned in closer, watching like a hawk. My hand was shaking, not from fear anymore, but from anger. From the sheer rage of realizing that the child I'd loved more than my own life now saw me as nothing more than an obstacle between him and money. The signature came out messy, shaky, but it was there. Calvin snatched the papers up immediately, checking the signature like he was authenticating a lottery ticket. Then he smiled, actually smiled, like he'd just won something. "See," he said, folding the papers and tucking them back into the folder. "That wasn't so hard." I wanted to scream. Wanted to tell him exactly what he'd just done, how spectacularly he'd just destroyed his own future. But I didn't. Because the only thing better than revenge is revenge that someone doesn't see coming. So I just stood there, letting him think he'd won. He put his hand on my shoulder, had the audacity to act like a caring son, and said, "Come on, let's get you home. You must be tired." Tired. That's what he thought I was. Not devastated. Not betrayed. Just tired. The drive back was silent. Calvin didn't even bother with small talk this time. Just drove with one hand on the wheel and the folder sitting on the seat between us like a trophy. I stared out the window at the darkening desert passing by, and I thought about all the ways a mother's love can be twisted into something ugly. All the ways trust can be used as a weapon. All the ways family can become the cruelest kind of enemy. But I also thought about justice. Real justice. The kind that doesn't come from anger or revenge, but from careful planning and one very smart lawyer who'd helped me protect myself when I'd needed it most. When we pulled up to my house, Calvin actually got out and opened my door for me. Helped me down from the truck like I was fragile. Like he hadn't just threatened to abandon me in the desert an hour ago. "You okay, Mom?" he asked, and I couldn't tell if he was genuinely concerned or just making sure I wasn't going to change my mind. "I'm fine," I said, pulling my keys out of my purse. "Thank you for the drive." Thank you. Like it was a nice afternoon outing. Like my heart wasn't broken into 1,000 pieces inside my chest. He hugged me then. Actually pulled me into a hug. And I let him, because I knew it would be the last one. "I'll call you in a few days," he said, climbing back into his truck. "We should celebrate. Maybe dinner at that Italian place you like." Celebrate. He wanted to celebrate stealing his mother's life savings. I watched him drive away, his taillights disappearing around the corner. Then I walked inside, locked the door behind me, and went straight to my desk. In the bottom drawer was an envelope I'd sealed 2 weeks ago. On the front, in my own handwriting, it said, "For Miriam, in case of coercion." I picked up my phone and called her number. She answered on the second ring. "Miriam," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "He did it. Calvin forced me to sign." There was a pause. Then, "Are you safe?" "I'm home. I'm okay. But we need to activate the contingency. I'll file the paperwork first thing in the morning." "Marjorie, I'm so sorry it came to this." "Me too," I whispered. Then I hung up and sat in the dark for a long time, holding that envelope and thinking about how sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones we loved first. The next 3 weeks were the strangest of my life. Calvin didn't call, didn't text, didn't stop by. It was like once he got what he wanted, I stopped existing to him. And maybe that was the point. Maybe I'd never been more than a bank account with a heartbeat. I went through my days in a fog. Made coffee I didn't drink. Started books I couldn't finish. Sat on the porch Walter built and watched the world keep spinning like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I'd look at photos of Calvin as a baby, this tiny, perfect thing that Walter and I had created, and I'd try to figure out where it all went wrong. Was it something I did? Something I didn't do? Did I love him too much or not enough? Or maybe some people are just born with a hole inside them that nothing can fill. Not love. Not family. Not even the memory of a father who worked himself to death trying to give them a better life. Tessa called me during that time. She had no idea what had happened, didn't know about the desert or the will or any of it. She just called like she always did, checking in, making sure I was eating enough, asking if I needed anything. "You sound tired," she said one afternoon. "Everything okay?" I almost told her. Almost said, "Your ex-husband drove me to the desert and threatened to leave me there unless I signed over my entire estate." But I didn't. Because Tessa had been through enough pain because of Calvin. She didn't need to carry any more of his cruelty. "Just getting older," I said instead. "Some days are harder than others." "Well, if you need anything, you call me. Promise." "I promise." After we hung up, I thought about how strange life is. How the person who married into our family showed more love than the person born into it. How blood doesn't guarantee loyalty, and sometimes the people who choose to stay are worth more than the ones who had no choice. 2.5 weeks after the desert, I got a call from Miriam. "It's time," she said. "Calvin made an appointment to come in tomorrow at 10. He wants to review the changes to your will and make sure everything's finalized." My stomach dropped. "He thinks he's coming to collect." "Exactly. And that's when we tell him the truth." She paused. "Do you want to be there?" I thought about it. Thought about sitting across from Calvin while he realized what he'd done. Thought about watching his face when he understood that his greed had cost him everything. "No," I said finally. "I don't need to see it. Just call me when it's over." "I'll record it," Miriam said. "For legal purposes. And maybe for your peace of mind." The next morning, I couldn't sit still. I cleaned the kitchen twice. Reorganized my closet. Pulled weeds in the garden until my hands hurt. Anything to keep from thinking about what was happening in Miriam's office right now. At 10:47, my phone rang. "It's done," Miriam said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Tell me everything." She laughed, actually laughed, and I realized it was the first time I'd heard joy in 3 weeks. "He walked in here like he owned the place. Sat down in that chair with his legs crossed, looking at his watch like I was wasting his time. Asked me to confirm that the estate transfer was complete and when he could start accessing the accounts." My heart was pounding. "What did you say?" I told him the transfer was indeed complete. Everything you owned, the house, the land, the investments, had been legally transferred as of the date you signed. And then I told him who it was transferred to. I held my breath. "Marjorie," I wish you could have seen his face. He went white. Actually white. Like all the blood just drained out of him in 1 second. He said, "What do you mean, Tessa?" Like he couldn't even process the words. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. I showed him the contingency will. Explained that you'd created it 2 weeks before his little desert trip. Told him that the moment you signed under duress, which we have documented evidence of, including your testimony and the circumstances, the contingency automatically took effect. Did he try to fight it? Oh, he tried. Stood up, started yelling about how this wasn't legal, how you couldn't have been in your right mind, how he was your son and had every right to his inheritance. Miriam's voice hardened. That's when I played him the recording. Your statement, clear as day, explaining why you felt threatened and why you wanted Tessa to be protected if anything happened. There was silence on the line for a moment. Then what? Then he asked if there was any way to contest it. I told him that attempting to overturn a will signed under duress would require him to admit that he coerced you, which would not only guarantee he'd lose the case, but could potentially lead to criminal charges for elder abuse. I hadn't thought about that angle. But Miriam was right. If Calvin fought this, he'd have to admit what he did. And admitting what he did meant admitting he was a criminal. He just stood there, Miriam continued, staring at the papers like they were in a foreign language. Then he looked at me and said, "She planned this. My own mother planned this." And I said, "No, Calvin. Your mother protected herself. There's a difference." My eyes were wet now, tears running down my face that I didn't bother to wipe away. "Did he say anything else?" "He asked if you knew. If you knew while you were signing in the desert what was going to happen. I told him I couldn't speak for you, but that you were a very intelligent woman who'd clearly thought ahead." A laugh bubbled up in my chest, bitter and sad and relieved all at once. "What did he do then?" "He left. Grabbed the papers, crumpled them up, threw them in the trash on his way out. Slammed the door so hard my secretary jumped. And that was it. That was it. 40 years of motherhood ended with a slammed door and crumpled papers in a trash can." "Miriam," I said quietly, "thank you." "Don't thank me. You did this. You protected yourself when you needed to. I just helped with the paperwork." After we hung up, I sat on my porch for a long time. The same porch where Walter proposed to me 53 years ago. The same porch where Calvin took his first steps. The same porch where I'd watched the sunset 1,000 times and thought about how lucky I was to have a family. But family isn't just blood. It's trust. It's respect. It's showing up when things are hard instead of only when there's something to gain. And Calvin had stopped being family a long time ago. I just hadn't wanted to see it until he forced me to. A week after Calvin found out, Tessa showed up at my door. She was holding a bouquet of wildflowers and had tears streaming down her face. "Marjorie, I don't even know what to say." I'd been expecting this conversation, dreading it and needing it at the same time. "Come in, sweetheart," I said, stepping aside. We sat in the living room, the same room where she and Calvin used to have Christmas morning breakfast before everything fell apart. She kept looking around like she was seeing ghosts. "Miriam called me," she said finally. "She told me what happened. What Calvin did to you. What you did for me." Her voice broke. "Marjorie, I can't accept this. It's too much. It's everything." I reached across and took her hand. "Tessa, listen to me. When Walter died, I had a choice. I could divide everything up right then and give Calvin his half, or I could wait and see what kind of man he'd become. I chose to wait. And he showed me exactly who he is. Someone who sees people as paychecks instead of human beings. Someone who'd threaten his own mother if it meant getting money faster." I squeezed her hand. "But you showed me who you are too. Every time you visited. Every casserole you brought. Every doctor's appointment you drove me to when Calvin couldn't be bothered to call." Tessa was crying openly now. "But I didn't do those things expecting anything in return." "I know. That's why you deserve this." We sat there for a while, neither of us speaking. Just two women who'd both loved Calvin in different ways and had both been disappointed by who he'd become. "What am I supposed to do with all this?" Tessa asked finally. "A house, land, investments. I don't know how to manage that kind of money." "Do whatever makes you happy," I said. "Invest it. Donate it. Use it to start that bakery you always talked about. Whatever you choose, it'll be a better use of that money than what Calvin had planned." She wiped her eyes and looked at me. "Did he try to contact you? After he found out?" "No. And I don't expect him to." "I'm so sorry, Marjorie. I know he's your son, and this must be—" "Don't," I interrupted gently. "Don't apologize for him. Don't carry his guilt. He made his choices, and now he has to live with them." Tessa nodded, then looked down at her hands. I've been thinking about opening a cafe. Something small. Somewhere people can come and feel welcome. Feel safe. That sounds perfect. I'd want to name it something meaningful. Something that represents what you taught me, that it's never too late to start over. To be better. What are you thinking? She smiled through her tears. Second chances. And just like that, something beautiful started growing from the ashes of Calvin's greed. Over the next few months, I watched Tessa transform. She found a small property downtown, renovated it herself with help from friends, and turned it into the kind of place that felt like home the moment you walked in. Warm lighting, comfortable chairs, coffee that actually tasted like someone cared about making it right. She hung photos on the walls. Some of them were pictures I'd given her from our old family albums. Walter at the lake. Me and Tessa at my birthday party 3 years ago. Even one of Calvin as a boy, because Tessa said everyone deserves to be remembered for who they were before they became who they are. I helped where I could. Gave advice. Taste-tested recipes. Sat in the corner booth while she worked and felt something close to pride watching her build something from nothing. The day second chances opened, there was a line around the block. People from town who remembered Tessa and wanted to support her. Strangers who'd heard about the cafe and wanted to see what the fuss was about. And me, sitting at that same corner booth, sipping coffee and thinking about how sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the best redemptions. Calvin never came by. Not on opening day. Not ever. But Tessa didn't seem to mind. She was too busy building a life that didn't need his approval. One evening, about 6 months after everything happened, Tessa closed up early and sat down across from me in that corner booth. "I have something for you," she said, sliding an envelope across the table. I opened it. Inside was a check, a portion of the profits from the cafe. "Tessa, no. That money is yours." "It's ours," she corrected. "None of this would exist without you. Without your trust. Without your courage to stand up for yourself when it mattered most." I looked at the check, then at her face. This woman who'd been through hell and come out stronger. "You know what Walter used to say?" "What?" "He said the best revenge is living well. Building something beautiful out of something broken." Tessa smiled. "Then I'd say we're both getting pretty good revenge." And she was right. Because every cup of coffee poured, every customer served, every smile shared in that cafe was proof that Calvin's greed hadn't destroyed us. It had freed us. I didn't hear from Calvin for almost a year. Not a phone call. Not a text. Not even a card on my birthday. It was like I'd died that day in the desert and he'd just moved on with his life. Some days I was okay with it. Other days, I'd see a father and son in the grocery store, laughing together, and I'd feel it all over again, that ache of losing someone who's still alive. Then one Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. Unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Mom." My heart stopped. I hadn't heard his voice in 12 months, and it sounded different. Smaller. Tired. "Calvin." There was a long pause. I wanted to call. See how you were doing. How I was doing. Like he'd been on a business trip instead of vanishing after trying to steal my entire estate. "I'm fine," I said, my voice flat. Another pause. "I heard about Tessa's cafe. Sounds like it's doing well." "It is." More silence. I could hear him breathing on the other end, and I wondered what he wanted. Apology. Forgiveness. Some magical reset button that would make everything go back to the way it was? "Mom, He stopped. Started again. "I've been thinking about what happened. About what I did. I didn't help him. Just waited. I was wrong. I know that now. I was desperate and stupid and I thought, I don't know what I thought. That you'd understand, maybe. That you'd just give me what I needed without making it complicated. You threatened to abandon me in the desert, Calvin. I know. You held a pen to my face and told me to sign over everything your father and I built, or you'd leave me there to die. I know, Mom. I know. But knowing and understanding are two different things. Knowing means you remember what you did. Understanding means you grasp why it was unforgivable. What do you want? I asked. He was quiet for a moment. I want to apologize. Really apologize. Not over the phone, but in person. I want to sit down and explain everything. The business, the debt, the pressure I was under. I want you to understand why I... There is no why, Calvin, I interrupted. There's no explanation that makes what you did okay. No amount of debt or pressure or desperation justifies threatening your mother's life. I wasn't going to actually leave you there. Weren't you? Silence. Because in that moment, standing in that desert with you holding my will like a weapon, I believed you would. I looked in your eyes and saw someone capable of driving away and letting me die out there. And that belief, that broke something in me that can't be fixed with a phone call. I heard him swallow hard. So what now? We just never speak again? I'm just cut out of your life forever. You cut yourself out, Calvin, the moment you chose money over family. The moment you saw me as an obstacle instead of your mother. I'm still your son. Are you? I asked quietly. Because sons don't do what you did. Sons don't threaten. Sons don't manipulate. Sons don't look at their mothers and calculate how much they're worth dead versus alive. He didn't respond to that. Calvin, I spent 40 years raising you. Teaching you right from wrong, showing you what love looks like. And somewhere along the way, you decided none of that mattered as much as money. That's not on me. That's on you. So that's it? You're just done. I thought about Walter, about what he'd say if he were here. And I knew exactly what he'd tell me. Respect is earned, not owed. I'm not done being your mother, I said finally. But I'm done pretending that blood erases betrayal. You want a relationship with me? Then you need to become the kind of person worth having a relationship with. And right now, you're not. How do I do that? His voice cracked. How do I fix this? I don't know if you can. But it starts with understanding that some things can't be taken back. Some wounds don't heal. Some trust, once broken, stays broken. There was a long silence. I'm sorry, Mom. For everything. I know you are. But sorry doesn't change what happened. It just means you feel bad about it now. We stayed on the line for another minute, neither of us speaking. Just breathing. Existing in the same moment, but worlds apart. Finally, Calvin said, "Take care of yourself, Mom." You too. He hung up first. I sat there with the phone in my hand, staring at the wall and feeling nothing. Not anger. Not sadness. Not even relief. Just emptiness. Because that's what betrayal does. It doesn't leave you with big dramatic feelings. It leaves you hollow. It takes the person you loved and replaces them with a stranger who has their face. That night, I went to Second Chances for dinner. Tessa had started serving simple meals in the evenings, soups, sandwiches, comfort food that made you feel like someone cared. She saw my face and knew immediately. He called. Yeah. What did he say? That he was sorry. That he wants to fix things. I looked down at my soup. But you can't fix something this broken. You can only learn to live with the pieces. Tessa sat down across from me. Do you think you'll ever forgive him? I thought about it. Really thought about it. Maybe someday. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. And it doesn't mean letting him back in like nothing happened. What does it mean? It means accepting that he made his choice, and I made mine. And we both have to live with the consequences. She nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. Standing up for yourself. Protecting yourself. Not everyone has that kind of strength. It doesn't feel like strength, I said quietly. It feels like survival. Sometimes they're the same thing. And maybe she was right. Maybe strength isn't about being unbreakable. Maybe it's about breaking and still finding a way to stand up afterward. Calvin never called again after that day. And honestly, I was okay with it. Because I'd learned something important in those months after the desert. You can love someone and still choose to protect yourself from them. You can grieve what could have been while accepting what is. You can be someone's mother and still draw a line they're not allowed to cross. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who refuse to treat you with respect, even if they're your own blood. 2 years passed like water through open hands. I settled into a new rhythm. Slower mornings. Longer walks. Coffee at second chances 3 times a week. Sitting in my corner booth and watching Tessa build something real out of the ashes of Calvin's betrayal. The cafe thrived. Became the kind of place where everyone knew your name and your usual order. Where first dates happened and business deals were made and lonely people found community. Tessa had framed that first check she'd given me and hung it on the wall with a small plaque underneath. For Marjorie, who taught me that second chances are earned, not given. I'd cried when I saw it. People in town knew the story by now. Not all the details, but enough. They knew Calvin had done something unforgivable. They knew I'd chosen Tessa over my own son. And most of them understood why. The ones who didn't, the ones who thought blood should trump everything, I didn't waste time explaining to them. Because some lessons can't be taught. They have to be lived. I heard about Calvin occasionally through the town grapevine. He'd moved 3 hours away, started over somewhere new. His business had folded not long after everything went down, and he'd filed for bankruptcy. Married the woman he'd left Tessa for, but that didn't last either. I didn't take pleasure in his struggles. Didn't feel vindicated or satisfied. Just sad. Sad that he'd thrown away everything that mattered for money he ended up losing anyway. One afternoon, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. I sat on my porch, the same porch Walter built, the same porch where this whole mess had started 2 years ago, and opened it with shaking hands. Mom, I know I don't have the right to write to you. I know I don't deserve your time or attention or forgiveness. But I need you to hear this anyway. You were right about everything. About me. About what I'd become. About how I'd lost sight of what really mattered. I've spent the last 2 years trying to figure out how I became the kind of person who could threaten his own mother. How I convinced myself that money was more important than family. How I looked at you that day in the desert and saw a problem to solve instead of the woman who gave me life. I don't have good answers. Just regret. I've lost everything since then. The business. The marriage. Friends who stopped taking my calls once they found out what I did. And I deserve every bit of it. But the thing I can't stop thinking about is the moment you took that pen from my hand. The way you looked at me. Not with fear, but with disappointment. Like you were watching someone you used to know turn into a stranger. I've become that stranger, Mom. And I hate him. I'm not writing this to ask for forgiveness. I know better than that. I'm writing because I want you to know that you were right to protect yourself. Right to choose Tessa. Right to draw a line I couldn't cross. I hope you're happy. I hope you're healthy. I hope you look at Tessa's cafe and feel proud of what you made possible. And I hope someday, when I look in the mirror, I'll see someone you could be proud of again. I love you. I always have. Even when I was too broken to show it properly. Calvin. I read it 3 times. Then I folded it carefully, put it back in the envelope, and set it on the table beside me. A part of me wanted to write back. To tell him I appreciated the letter. To offer some small olive branch that might begin to rebuild what he'd destroyed. But another part, the part that had survived that day in the desert, knew better. Because words are easy. Change is hard. And until Calvin proved he'd actually become a different person, a letter was just paper and ink. So I didn't respond. Just kept living my life. Kept visiting second chances. Kept building a new kind of family with Tessa and the community we'd created together. Sometimes healing isn't about reconciliation. Sometimes it's about learning to be whole without the people who broke you. And I was whole. Maybe for the first time in years. The cafe continued to grow. Tessa hired more staff, expanded the menu, started hosting community events on weekends. Poetry readings. Book clubs. Open mic nights where people shared their stories and found connection in shared pain. One evening, she dedicated one of those open mic nights to me. For Marjorie, she announced to the crowd, who showed me that strength isn't about never breaking, it's about choosing how to rebuild. People I'd known for decades stood up and shared their own stories of betrayal and survival. Of choosing themselves when others wouldn't. Of learning that love without respect isn't really love at all. I sat there crying, not sad tears, but grateful ones. Because out of the worst moment of my life had come this. Community, connection, proof that one person's cruelty doesn't have to define your story. When I got home that night, I looked at Calvin's letter again. Read it one more time. Then I put it in a box with other memories I wasn't ready to throw away but couldn't keep looking at either. Maybe someday I'd read it again with different eyes. Maybe someday I'd reach out and see if the person who wrote those words had actually changed. But not today. Today, I was choosing peace over reconciliation. Healing over hope. Myself over the ghost of who my son used to be. And that felt like enough. I'm 80 now. 2 years older than I was on that terrible Tuesday when Calvin drove me to the desert. Some days feel longer than others. My knees hurt more. I forget things I used to remember easily. But I'm still here. Still standing. Still whole. I sit on my porch most evenings now, the same porch where Walter proposed and Calvin learned to walk. The same porch where I opened that letter 2 years ago and chose not to respond. The wood is weathered now. Needs replacing in some spots. But I like it this way, imperfect, worn, still standing despite everything. Kind of like me. Tessa stops by most afternoons on her way home from the cafe. Brings me soup or fresh bread or just sits with me while the sun sets. We don't talk about Calvin much anymore. Not because it's forbidden, but because we've said everything there is to say. He's a chapter in both our lives that we've learned to close. Last month, I updated my will again. Left everything to Tessa officially this time. No contingencies, no backup plans. Just a straightforward transfer to the daughter I chose instead of the son I birthed. Miriam smiled when I signed the papers. No desert trips this time? No desert trips. We both laughed, because sometimes the only way to heal from trauma is to find humor in surviving it. I think about Walter often. Wonder what he'd say about everything that happened. Part of me thinks he'd be disappointed in Calvin, but another part thinks he already knew. Already saw the seeds of greed taking root in our son and hoped love would be enough to stop them from growing. It wasn't. But that's not our failure. That's Calvin's. Because we gave him everything, love, support, opportunity, values. What he chose to do with those things was beyond our control. I've learned that parents can't save their children from themselves. We can guide, teach, demonstrate, hope. But ultimately, Every person makes their own choices and has to live with the consequences. Calvin made his choice in that desert. And I made mine. Sometimes I wonder if he ever drives past second chances. If he sees the line out the door and the lights in the windows and realizes what he gave up. If he understands that the inheritance he tried to steal is now feeding strangers and building community and creating exactly the kind of legacy Walter would have wanted. I hope he does. Not because I want him to suffer, but because I want him to see that his cruelty didn't win. That his mother and his ex-wife took what he tried to destroy and built something beautiful instead. There's a photo on the wall of second chances now, Tessa's favorite. It's me and Walter on our 40th anniversary, both of us gray and wrinkled and grinning like idiots. Tessa says it reminds her what real love looks like. Not perfect, she told me once. Just real. Just two people who chose each other every day, even when it was hard. That's what Calvin never understood. That love is a choice, not an obligation. That family is built through respect and trust, not just shared DNA. I've made peace with losing him. Some days it still hurts, probably always will. But the hurt doesn't control me anymore. It's just part of my story, like every scar and wrinkle and gray hair. Evidence that I lived. That I survived. That I chose myself when no one else would. The desert wind still blows through town sometimes. On those days, I pour myself tea and sit on my porch and remember standing in that endless sand with my son's ultimatum hanging in the air. Sign the will or sleep here tonight. I signed. But not the way he wanted. And that pen stroke, that one moment of quiet defiance, changed everything. Calvin thought he buried me that day. Thought he'd broken my spirit and stolen my power. But all he did was show me exactly who he was. And give me the clarity to protect myself from him. So yeah, I lost my son. But I gained something too. The knowledge that I'm stronger than I thought. Braver than I believed. Capable of making impossible choices when I have to. Walter used to say that respect is the real inheritance. The only thing that really matters when everything else is gone. He was right. And Calvin lost his inheritance the moment he stopped respecting the woman who gave him everything. I hope he learns that lesson someday. I hope he becomes the kind of man Walter tried to raise him to be. I hope he finds peace and purpose and something worth living for beyond money and status. But whether he does or doesn't, I'm okay. Because I've learned the most important lesson of all. You can survive anything if you refuse to let it define you. The sun is setting now, painting the sky orange and red like it did that day in the desert. But this time, I'm not afraid. This time, I'm sitting on my porch with tea in my hand and peace in my heart. And that feels like victory. Not the loud, dramatic kind. Just the quiet, steady kind that comes from knowing you stood up for yourself when it mattered most. Second Chances is closing up for the night. I can see the lights going off one by one, and I know Tessa will stop by soon with whatever's left from today's baking. We'll sit here together, two women who survived the same man's betrayal, and we'll watch the stars come out like we do most nights. And tomorrow, we'll wake up and do it all again. Because that's what survival looks like. Not one big moment of triumph, but 1,000 small ones. Every morning you choose to get up. Every evening you choose peace over bitterness. Every day you build something beautiful out of something broken. Calvin tried to bury me in the desert. But I buried his greed instead. And from that dry sand, something beautiful grew. Forgiveness. Community. Second chances. Not for him. For me. And that's enough. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more powerful stories like this one. Turn on notifications because we've got incredible stories coming that will restore your faith in justice, resilience, and the power of choosing yourself. Drop a comment below and tell us about a time you had to stand up for yourself. Your story could inspire someone who needs to hear it today. Share this video with someone who needs to know that it's never too late to choose dignity over betrayal. We're building a community of survivors here, and your voice matters. See you in the next story, and remember, respect is the real inheritance.